Welcome back to the Lessons for Tomorrow podcast, the motivational poster in your ear. I'm your host, Tim Ahlenius, VP of Strategic Initiatives at AmericanEagle.com. And in this episode, we're going to be diving into a post-holiday analysis, including supply chain challenges, Omicron, and the economic recovery. Because believe it or not, Christmas was only 38 days ago, which is crazy, only. I am so excited to discuss all of these topics, and I am joined today again by Megan Blissick, and she is the head of global agency partnerships at Signifyd. Welcome, Megan.
So nice to see you, Tim.
Yes, it's great to have you back in the studio. Excited that you made it into the snowy Chicago area for us to record this episode today. So, Megan, you have a new role since you were last on the show. You want to give us a little bit of background about this head of global agency partnerships and just what you're doing at Signifyd now as a leader in the e-commerce protection industry. And, of course, you've got a wide background of experience there, but kind of tell us a little bit about the shift in role and what you're doing today.
Yeah, you're really plugging me there, Tim. I appreciate it. So this year I'm stepping into a more broad and global role as we continue to build out our partnerships program. You know, Signifyd only exists because we have amazing partners like AmericanEagle.com. And, you know, as we continue to become a global leader in the e-commerce fraud prevention landscape, and as this honestly becomes a more salient issue for a lot of merchants as business continues to grow more and more online, we really want to make sure that we're servicing our customers around the world. So our team has actually expanded on partnerships to include partnerships in our London office and our Mexico City office, as well as North America. We're actually becoming global, so we needed a global head to oversee all of that work.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, congrats, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today. Just like last time, there's a lot to discuss, so let's jump right on in. Really, let's start off just with what the expectations for 2022 already, right? There's a wild read on what to expect for 2022, but beyond that point, this year's holiday season, looking backwards at Christmas too, but what's some of the just trends that Signifyd saw in the space, and what can e-commerce practitioners expect to see moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that conversations last year were pretty heavily dominated by not only COVID, but by the supply chain challenges that were caused by that. I think the general public started seeing things in late October, early November of, this is a really big issue. You know, we all kind of laughed at the evergreen challenge of the boat getting stuck in the canal, but then we realized, okay, we've got a lot of ships off the port of California to the point where our president had to issue a mandate to get 24-hour work over there. That's where a lot of our merchandise comes from. So customers did take note. They realized, okay, there's a longer lead time. I can't expect to have items in 2, 3, 4 days. Shipping cutoffs, I saw some merchants as early as 2 weeks before Christmas were doing their shipping cutoffs to get it there. And the numbers really showed that. We had a huge spike in volume for year-over-year change for the last holiday season, starting actually 4 weeks before Black Friday.
Yeah, that was crazy this year. Just the amount of pre-November, and I would say even very beginning of October, late September, promotions of Black Friday savings and opportunity for that holiday shopping season that was much earlier than ever before because of all these logistics problems that these suppliers and distributors have had.
Exactly. Usually we see some significant growth year over year. I believe, companies like eMarketer have always projected about 5 to 6% growth online. But what we were seeing prior to Black Friday were 30, 35, up to 55% year over year change in volume, which is pretty incredible. Right around Black Friday, Cyber Monday, numbers stayed pretty flat. We still saw some growth in the days following, but where we really saw a lot of growth, and you might have been able to guess this one, but we saw gift card volume more than double across the board for the entire month of November. Yeah. So we really saw a lot of people, either realizing I need to get my products earlier, or I need to get a product that doesn't have any lead time to get into the hands of the person that's buying it.
Yeah, it was, in my mind, also the safer purchase for some people, because a gift card means that you're not responsible for the actual gift's arrival date. You're still giving them something to choose themselves. And I think personally that would be kind of my mentality of, well, if I can't guarantee that the actual product will get here, let me just get them the gift card, and they still get to pick what they want, but at the same time, I'm not responsible for having it on Christmas Day, so or any of the holidays at that time of year. So with all of that, and as we look at the fact that, as you mentioned, we saw that big, larger uptick prior to Black Friday, and Black Friday, Cyber Monday numbers stayed about the same. That's usually where we see that big initial spike in the holiday commerce season. And I wonder if this effect is going to just be for the duration of where the logistics need to catch up, or if you think that maybe that we're going to start to see that this is just the new norm, to kind of use that phrase.
Yeah, I think we're all used to and tired of that phrase. But it's true. The cyclical shopping experience is no longer there, especially, Omicron threw a huge wrench in things and a lot of plans. We were planning for a great and safe Christmas and holiday season. But, we're seeing these waves across the world, which also really throws things off when you have to realize we're working on a global scale. Every time that you're buying a product that's at Target or Walmart, it's probably has some footprint in another country. Mm-hmm. So as we continue to deal with the kind of unequal rollout of vaccinations, things like that, we're going to continuously see interruptions in the supply chain in places we wouldn't necessarily anticipate. So the holidays are more fluid now. Mm-hmm. Some people are opting for experiences rather than for physical goods and products. We'll always see a volume shift and a volume increase, but seeing it spread out over a larger period of time, we're seeing, again, people opt into these alternatives of gift cards, things like that. I think we're going to expect not as heavy of a consumer shopping experience in the last 3 months of the year.
Yeah, no, and one thing I just want to say on that, just the footprint of a product being in other countries. Again, I always like to bring personal stories into this. So I've talked about the couch a lot in the past number of episodes, but we bought a couch last May. It was supposed to be delivered in October. We knew that there was, delays and everything, and that was okay. Well, that seems lengthy, but it's a big piece of furniture. Then we were told, it's not October anymore, it's January. And that was because of the international foam shortage, which I just was an interesting tidbit, that foam had a shortage.
It does.
And then with that, we got the January notice, now it's delayed until March. Oof. And then 2 days later, we got now it's delayed till May. And I'm like, okay, this is 12 months, sorry.
It feels like 12
later,
years,
it feels
though, right?
like 12 years. And I'm like, we wanted a couch. We already rearranged the room. And I'm like, I just got to get rid of this old one because I got plenty of foam that was coming out of that couch that I could have used in the new couch. But with that, we ended up just going to a local manufacturer. It's a big name. And we went to their outlet. And we talked with them. We found something that fit the space. And the order was with them too, which was kind of nice. I was like, at least I'm still giving them some of that business that was going to be there. Yeah. But we ended up actually changing our mind for what we needed because we had that length of time to really see the room, see what we wanted, and we completely went a different direction. So I just see that some of these logistical delays are also going to cause that within products. It's a study I haven't done yet to say how many people are changing their minds of what they really want because it's not coming right away. And this is where we've talked about brand loyalty in the past too, mm-hmm. and the loss of brand loyalty because people are looking for just inventory first.
Yeah.
And so it's just really unique to me where returns, and just kind of get back to returns here, was there an uptick in return abuse or not because the amount of product that was going out was not the same as what it used to be?
Yeah, I think you nailed it, right? There is one of the reasons that you don't want to buy a gift for someone is always and has always been that you don't want them to not like it and then have to return it. So we see all these gift card purchases, mm-hmm. But we also see people expecting to get a product at a certain time, or people buying something that the inventory is no longer in stock. That happened to me twice recently with a large shoe retailer because someone was coming out to Chicago and did not have the proper footwear. So as I'm trying to make sure that I've got winter boots that will walk through the 7 inches of snow on the ground right now, it looks like other people had the same idea. Mm-hmm. So canceled orders were coming in not only from the merchants but from customers. So at Signifyd, we also not only prevent fraud, but we also look into consumer abuse, which is of course, a good customer doing what we would call a bad behavior. So the customer actually receives their product, but then they file a claim with their credit card saying, I never received it, or it's not as it was described. One of the other things that they can do is cancel the order. If that's timed out correctly, the order is already shipped out. They've canceled it, gotten the money back, and then also get the product. So not giving people ideas here. But we did see canceled merchandise being our largest consumer abuse chargeback reason, which, usually we would see the item not received claims in the beginning of pandemic, and that was, twofold. It's quite easy to claim item not received, just say, oh, I didn't get it, and there's no way to prove that, but also, people weren't getting their products. I live in New York. Porch theft is a real thing. I've also seen it's a real thing anywhere else. There's the videos of the woman in the minivan driving behind the Amazon truck and picking the parcels up off the front steps. I've seen some funny Nest Cam videos too, where people have taken their own revenge on that.
Well, and not only the porch thefts, but even just the stories about the delivery company drivers who just dumped all their packages.
Really?
There was two different states I saw that report in. One of them had over 600 packages. The delivery driver just chucked 600 of them into a ravine and went and just closed out his day and said he was done. Oof. And another one was someone who just didn't want to deliver stuff, so they would just throw out some at random times. It's crazy that we suddenly had this shift of dependability. And then we didn't have the option of actually having those end users. Like, what happens to those packages? The police find them. Are they re-delivered? Are they not? I mean, it's an interesting world that we're living in with delivery and porch thefts and everything. And with all the Ring cameras, too, it's almost everyone expects a Ring camera now, but it still happens.
Yeah, and it's hard because logistics are a huge challenge. On the front end, that's what we've been talking about for this entire holiday season, was seeing the issues on the front end. But on the back end, it's so much more complicated. No one has figured out returns yet. I can pretty confidently say that. Like, someone's going to follow up from this podcast and be like, oh, we've got it in the bag, and I want to hear from them. So challenge is put out there. But about 30% of e-commerce sales are returned compared to 10% in physical stores. E-commerce is a bit more impulsive, or you're buying a gift for someone, sending it somewhere else. Or you're buying multiple things, trying them on, and shopping at your house effectively, sending something back. But when we keep seeing these huge spikes in volume on e-commerce, and then we think about 30% of those products going back, some of those products are seasonal and they can't be returned, or they can't be returned at full price. And then we actually have fraudulent returns. About 7.5% of orders online are fraudulently returned. Oh, wow. Which is crazy.
And that's just the shipping back an empty box or a box with something else in it that wasn't the product that they purchased, right?
That is true. Yeah. We've seen I think the fan favorite of the fraud stories is the iPhone as a potato. So ship back is, this happens because, you send it to, you go and return your product at a shipping warehouse or center. They weigh the package. If the weights match up, send it back, send your money back. But by the time it gets back, someone has to open and inspect that. They may or may not. And, then as long as you've got the same weight within the parcel, you're pretty much set to go on the return side. So there's full running resealing and repackaging operations where people are really running return fraud rings, and that's been a huge growth over the past 2 years, whereas we were really seeing a lot of the phishing scams or a lot more of the front end scams. We're now seeing a lot of returns abuse.
Yeah, so we'll dive into that in just a moment, but a fun random fact, since you mentioned potatoes in that iPhone case. If everyone remembers science class, you can actually use a potato to power a clock. So it's just a fun random fact that it's incredible what you can do with a potato when you have one.
Potato power.
Yes, potato power. I always wanted to make a little go-kart out of potatoes. I'm sure someone's done that science experiment. They can potato power their go-kart out of the potato being the car. So
I usually just make hash browns.
Instead of EV vehicles, we'll have potato vehicles. Anyways, I digress. Let's talk about year-over-year changes and just the major trends. We've talked about a few. We talked about the return fraud, especially for e-commerce online. I think you're spot on with the fact that the 30% is because of multiple sizes or missizing information. I find that all the time with, my latest example, because I always go to personal examples, it's the best to talk about life, is ordering a pair of cross-country skis. So, of course, it's never the surprise for my wife and I what we get each other for the holidays, but our kids think that, oh my gosh, Dad didn't know. And so we ordered them, and one night we're looking at them, I'm like, oh, okay. Everything was in centimeters and European sizing.
Oh, no.
And so I was just like, okay, let me try and do my math calculations here, and 2.2 to the decimal of what to convert centimeters to inches and all that fun stuff. Of course, I ordered completely the wrong size of skis. But fun result of that is they fit perfectly for my oldest son.
Oh.
And so we were able to give them to him and just order a pair of boots. So the same company actually ended up, because of that issue of conversion for me, because a US-based site didn't convert it for me, which is a different discussion. I ended up buying 2 pairs of skis from them and another pair of boots because I got them for my son to wear with his. So all of a sudden now they've doubled their transactions with me just because of a mishap. Now that's a different side of the story from your 30% that you were talking about with returns, but the return process was really interesting because for this company, certain products ordered online are not allowed to be returned to their store.
Yes.
And then you get to the charging costs, and with everything with logistics and inflation and other factors, now they're trying to charge me money to ship it back to them, even if I wasn't buying another product, which is really interesting to me because now it's like, oh, do I really want to pay that $11? Amazon does the same thing. I can drive to Kohl's and drop off all my Amazon returns and not have to pay anything and just drop it off there. Don't even have to box it. They box it for me. That changed my life. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I'll drive out of my way to go there. Now, I don't buy anything in Kohl's anymore. My wife will, so I try to drop them off. But with that, it's just driving your foot traffic back in store is interesting. But to restrict people was also really interesting, where if you have the retail stores, why not accept it? And I think that goes back to your earlier point where logistics is such an issue right now. If they get it in store, they're not meant to sell it in store. How do they get it back to their warehouse to ship out?
Exactly. And, we did an analysis and found that the additional related costs of shipping, restocking, refurbishing, liquidating cost 3.7 times the cost of goods.
Wow.
So sometimes just actual returns, not fraudulent, but regular returns are too expensive. And you'll see these reports near the end of every holiday season that say, keep the product and the money. And, someone tries to return a high ticket item that's heavy, like a couch or a television, and they get told by the merchant, here's your money back and just keep the product because we don't want to figure out how to get it back. And that's because, 25% of returned items can't be refurbished or resold. That can be because they're damaged in any of the shipping. You might get the product and it arrived damaged, or it's a seasonal product if we're talking like clothing and merchandise, things like that. And then it's also really bad for the environment. About $5 billion of product ends up in landfills from the returns process because
Just from returns
because that carbon footprint of getting a product in your warehouse already, just getting it there, shipping it out to a customer. You might have to use a last mile shipping service as well on top of the actual shipping. It gets packaged, it gets unpackaged, gets sent back, and then it has to go back to either that distribution center or a secondary distribution center, get checked for verification because we now have fraud in that process. Make sure it's actually shoes and not rocks in the box. And it could be sent back to them, or it could be sent to a liquidator, a third party, and then shipped out again. Like that's it's a long journey for a product, and it's really hard for merchants to find the best way to do that, especially when we look at merchants really being asked to expand internationally and globally. Yeah, no, it's true. Talking about just sustainability, I do love how Patagonia has really gone and focused on that as just a core. They've had it as a core mission for a long time, but just the fact on some of the recycled aspects of what they're doing, but even upcycling or whatever the correct phrase is for that, but taking your product, sending it back in for repair. I never would have thought about that, but when I look at some of the quality of what's made in some of these products, that gives me, I like it. I like fit. I just need this fixed on it. It's a nice option for people instead of just buying new and throwing out. And so that return process, all that packaging is saved because you're not buying new and having a new one sent. You're not filling a landfill with your
X products. Wow, I'm really going off the deep end there. I X you. But overall, I think that it's all part of the supply chain itself, right? So the returns is part of it. The new product shipment is part of it. The refurbished market is always hit or miss depending on what you have. But overall, I do want to make sure after this podcast recording, I get that list of companies that tell you to keep it and give the money back. Just
everyone wants that.
I know,
right?
everyone wants that list. But let's talk about the holiday window shift a little bit more. And do we expect to see that again this year in your mind? I'm going to ask you to look a little bit into the future here, right? Part of our show title. But where do you think, is that still going to be a problem at the end of this year in 2022? Are we going to recover a bit more? Or let's hear your thoughts.
This is an interesting one to predict because I think a lot of this actually has to do with global policy, which as much as I do appreciate all the plugging at the beginning, I'm not sure I'm an expert there yet. But, when we look at a global supply chain, that's really what's impacting this. We still have shortages in products. I feel sorry for you if you've anyone that's tried to buy a car in the past year. Chip shortages have been as prevalent as foam shortages. So if we reach a consensus on COVID policies, where some places are shutting down when one case happens and some places are trying to kind of move forward with how things are now, we'll start to see more balancing out. We're also seeing within our own government a lot of work being done to curb spiking inflation rates, which in part were coming from these product shortages. That's the one thing we don't talk about here is, when you can't get that product, someone else is going to sell you that product for a higher price, whether it's a secondary market or another retailer. And we definitely felt that in the end of the holiday season. We saw that, we could still get products, but they cost quite a bit different recently. So I think that the way that we're approaching the market of let's get things under control, let's get more consistent again. Also, we're seeing a lot of easing up on the so-called revenge spending, which I think was very prevalent this holiday season. This was the first holiday that a lot of people were actually able to get together. And average order value was up 150% every day of Cyber Week. Yeah. People went big this year. So I think that as we are getting back into balance, we're easing a lot of these financial stimulus measures. We're pushing up interest rates to help curb the inflation. Customers are going to act a bit more as anticipated, but yeah, I think we're still going to see some fear lingering on from the unexpectedness of the past 2 years.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with the first point you made about this of just the policies of, is the workplace shutting down with one, or is it they're still trying to move it forward? Because that is what impacted especially the footprint in other countries too, is the manufacturing side of it, the plants to produce it and all of that. But then that streamlines all down the supply chain of from the manufacturer to the delivery driver to the shipping, right? So boat, we had all the unloading issues on the West Coast, and then just even air travel too, because if you don't have enough pilots and everything, then you have that lack of traffic to bring everything over, and you always want to maximize the shipping method. So you don't want to wait and just send a partially filled boat or plane or whatever vehicle. And then with that, the last mile delivery you hit on earlier too, and I think that's a key one. We talked about that in the past about how you can't control the brand experience with that last mile delivery company, and they also are having shortages of people available to deliver and who are willing to go and do that work right now. So I think that all of that just stems together and fits perfectly with kind of your thought of we're going to still see some of the issues at the end of this year, probably into 2023 as everything starts to hopefully, to use the analogy, right the boat, right the ship. But let's talk a little bit about digital only purchases and the uptick that was seen in that area.
Yes, that's always an interesting one. Also, I can leave you with one of the scariest statistics that I saw that I actually had to go back and look at. The cost of a shipping container from Asia topped $20,000 last year. A few years ago, the cost was $2,000.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I had to reread that one a few times when we really...
So 2,000 to 20,000.
Yes, in less than 2 years. So when we think about these, like, that's the thing. If you need to get your product on a boat, that was the premium this holiday season. So when we look at these really crazy inflation numbers on our end, it's coming from every single step of the supply chain, which is why people have opted to digital goods, because they're, hey, an e-gift card, pretty good option sometimes.
So I'm intrigued. I'm going to go a little bit into the future here, and then I want to just talk about any other anomalies that you saw with the holiday season. Metaverse has been a huge topic. And you talk about digital goods. I've been doing a ton of research on this. We're exploring some areas with a few different clients for the direction of bringing both commerce and experiences into the metaverse. And with that, we have digital goods in there. So we've seen huge stories. Nike bought a company called Artifact, and I can't remember how to spell it because it's numbers and letters, and it's like R8, And
it's
they
a tech
bought it because
company
of
if it's
digital.
spelled wrong.
Yes, you do. You do. If it's spelled wrong, it's a tech company, even though there's a squiggly red lines under it. But with this, it was a digital shoes for your avatar, and they were selling for $3,000, $6,000, and $10,000 a pair. Digital products.
Yes.
And the company got purchased by Nike, and we saw Adidas do some of this, and we have all the NFTs and everything, and we've got some of the high-end luxury bag designers also starting to build these digital products. But now there's this concept of also giving a digital product in the metaverse, so I could buy that purse for my wife and give it to her, and she could choose to keep it in the metaverse and accessorize her avatar with it, I think is the right way to phrase that.
Yeah.
And then she can also look to trade it for a physical bag. And I'm just shocked at, like, what is this going to mean for the return industry and fraud? And because I can't return a digital good easily. You can ask for some of the companies, like Apple had to deal with it with the App Store with accidental purchases by 6-year-olds or younger. And it's a certain point that you get a certain kind of just grace period. But what do you think is going to happen with all these digital goods in that type of metaverse virtual reality world?
Yeah, that's a interesting world. I'm sure all the gamers listening to this podcast are shouting right now that this is not the first time this happened. I mean, go back to Fortnite a few years ago, and people are buying skins and designs for their avatars that do, nothing to actually help them win the game, but they're buying dances that they can borrow online. The concept of buying digital goods has been around for a while. The concept of digital goods becoming physical is a really interesting place. And I think that as we continue to look at how much our digital lives are part of our physical lives, it makes more sense, right? Like I read one article in the metaverse that did kind of hurt my brain a bit because it had the two photos, one which had gone through all of its filters and one that was the original. Said, which of these is actually real, because this is the one that's online, is seen by your peers, and this is how you're perceived to be. So how is that any less real than the photo as it was? Still something I think about like every other day. I'm like, breaks my brain a little bit. But I think, like, looking at it through a commerce perspective, the companies I have spoken with about this are ones that are comfortable with the digital universe. So I've so far spoken to video game companies about, having the capability to unlock physical goods within your digital accomplishments. So a little different than trading something you purchase virtually to physically, but having that reward system of, oh, you achieved this in this game, now we're going to send you a physical product. So I think it's been around in more fringe sections, that bringing this into the mainstream landscape has a place. I think it has to figure out what that place is, because right now, NFTs have not found their place yet. Correct. I think cryptocurrency is starting to find its place, but it's still swinging very wildly. So, until there's a actual purpose behind it, it's going to be a really fluid concept. And then once the why can be answered, I think it will be much more widely adopted.
Yeah, great way to phrase it. And I completely agree, because just like crypto, the metaverse has over 100 plus different worlds and metaverses that are out there. Until that kind of just unification comes down to what the core platform really is, we're going to just see these splintered experiences. And we saw it in a lot of different other areas of tech and everything. Even digital e-commerce was very splintered at first. And then you kind of had that, main concept of digital commerce happen through Amazon, in my mind, of where you had this kind of global store. It didn't start with as many products as they had, and they focused on just books, but it really grew into that marketplace area. So once we see that unification, we'll have more of an insight into it. So I'm excited to see where that goes, and not as excited to hear about the fraud that happens with it, but I know Signifyd will be there for helping people navigate it.
We will be there.
Any other anomalies or any other tidbits that you want to share on today's episode?
Yeah, I had one interesting thing. So from our listeners that don't remember Signifyd from the last time we were on here, we are an e-commerce fraud prevention solution. We sit right after you click the buy button on most sites and before on some. And we can really look at everything that a customer is doing and all the information they're sharing to help make the best decision as to whether or not their order is legitimate. That means we work across a ton of different industries. So all these numbers, all this cool data that we've been bringing up is a global take on over 20 different e-commerce industries, which means we get to break down by those. So this year we looked at the year-over-year change in fraud pressure. Fraud pressure is measured by how many orders we deem as potentially fraudulent. So when someone goes to make a purchase, if a lot of red flags show up, like for instance, their email address is a day or two old, that might be a little sketchy, or their billing and shipping address mismatch, which doesn't necessarily mean fraud. It could be a gift, which we're used to in the holidays, but it could be something else. They have no social media accounts. They pretty much just showed up. Their credit card has been flagged before, or they've charged something back before at a different store. Once we say there's enough red flags for us to turn down this order, we consider that fraud pressure. So this year, we actually saw huge lifts in beauty and cosmetics and in grocery and household goods in terms of fraud pressure, more attempts to order fraudulent items. And we actually saw the biggest decrease year over year in home goods and decor and electronics.
Interesting.
Yeah, kind of interesting.
Groceries, I'd say I understand. We have started utilizing online grocery shopping a lot more, just for the convenience when busy schedules with the kids and everything. It's just nice to be able to just order and do that. But the electronics one and household goods, I would think, would still kind of stay up there overall. Any insights into why that might be happening?
Yeah, so electronics is usually what we kind of see as the golden goose of fraudulent products. It's tends to be lightweight, high order value, and high secondary market value. So it can be sold for near the retail price. So to see a decrease in the holiday season on electronics means that either fraudsters are trying to go with different types of fraud, more returns abuse rather than flat out fraud attempts, show up on the back end, and that goes back to our iPhone potato, which we did see more returns abuse and more fraudulent returns. So it could either be that they're moving down the supply chain because they're getting caught at the front, or it can be that there's other types of fraud that are coming into play. We did see a huge portion of the fraudulent orders come in as mule fraud this year, which includes that innocent buyer in the middle. Unfortunately, they've been tricked into doing this either by a job board. There's romance fraud, which is also a type of mule fraud. Your internet boyfriend got stuck in another country because the weather was terrible and needs $1,000 to buy a plane ticket. These kind of tricky things that show up along the way. But seeing more mule fraud is actually really interesting. We're still seeing a lot of people getting tricked into scams and buying products on behalf of fraudsters. So seeing that decrease in electronics, I think to me just speaks that there's less of the traditional, stolen credit card fraud going on, and they're getting a bit more creative and thoughtful.
Yeah. So I want to go back for a moment to one of the points you talked about where Signifyd sits is, I like to kind of call it the silent auditor, the silent observer, right? In between the click of the buy button and then the actual order going fully into the e-commerce organization systems.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening, because you talked about like an email address that's a day old or 2 days old and all that. So Apple released with one of their, the iOS 15 update, this Hide My Email.
Yes.
And Hide My Tracking. And I will admit I have used the Hide My Email on sites. I'm just like, you know what? Well. I really don't want my personal email in their list. I've seen my email get grabbed so many times by different data incidents and breaches and everything, and just people who have sold it. I know they're selling it, even though they won't admit they are. So I started using that more, and I'm just curious how that is being handled with Signifyd, because we've got some of this push now from the major tech giants who are saying, hey, we're going to try and help you protect your privacy. But that also, I think, that kind of dampens the impact that you have to audit and say how valid that purchase is. Now, are you looking at the other factors in that case beyond the email? You mentioned a whole list of what you kind of use as criteria. But just curious if you've seen an uptick of just that use.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I use that feature too. And I think with customers, when big tech entered the scene back in like the mid 2010s, there was no regulation on data usage. When I worked at a marketing agency, it was partially through my time working there that Facebook actually removed 80 of the targeting categories you were allowed to use because customers said, hey, I don't want you to know everything about me and my life, accepting cookies now, using the privacy features on Apple. Customers want some control of their data, but they also are comfortable sharing information when they know how it's being used and when they know it's being used to benefit them.
Yeah.
So that is one part, and I completely agree with that. Like, you should have privacy and safety on the internet. The other part is that, Signifyd does collect about 80 different data points. So if we're missing one, and this is actually where we help more customers get through. So a verified email address is something really, really valuable to a company. If you have an account with them, if you have a loyalty program, that's why almost every website you go on tries to get you to create an account when you're checking out. It's a really secure way for them to verify that you are who you say you are. Also, if all of your information auto-populates, it makes it easier for you to move through the checkout flow.
Yes.
We have products that do that. We have, even just Google Chrome does that and stores your information. So it's less of a need for people to actually create individual accounts. And then now we don't even need to put our email addresses out there. But Signifyd collects, again, a lot of different data points so that we're looking at a very holistic view of the person that is actually making the purchase. We have device information as well. So where are you buying the product? And information from the website. How long are you spending? How did you navigate around? And is that typical behavior compared to other people that buy things on this specific website? Most people spend, say, 5 minutes on the website before they get to the checkout flow, or most people go and check on, put things into their cart before. And if you navigate directly from a search engine to a product display page, put the item in your cart and check out in 20 seconds, and it's a $3,000 order, might be a little sketchy.
Yeah.
But you might have gone and visited that website 100 times at this point, and you're finally just ready to pull the trigger on that big purchase. We use all of those different points of data to make a very rounded out decision on a customer. And the way that actually helps more orders get through is that if one or two of those things are kind of weird, like the email address is a scrambled email, or the one I always use because I always forget this, but your CVV code, because that won't auto-populate, which is good. But if everything else looks legitimate, I'm using the same email address I've always used, and I'm at my IP address, I'm at my house buying this product. When everything else looks good and you've got a company using Signifyd, we can say, okay, it's not the perfect buyer, but it's enough for us to say yes and put our guarantee on it. So if it is fraud, if someone did steal my credit card and they're buying something while I'm out of my house, then Signifyd will reimburse the merchant in full. Cost of the product, the taxes, the shipping, all those expensive logistics we just talked about. So we are able to work without an entire set of data to make that decision. And that's really where merchants have seen that value, because we have a bit more understanding of the customer than they do, which is usually why our merchants, when they come on board, not only do they see all their chargebacks drop to zero, but they actually see a 4 to 6% increase in top line revenue because more sales are being let through.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And again, our partner Signifyd and Megan talking to us about all of the wonderful aspects of returns and everything that we expect at the holiday season and merchants don't want to expect. So again, thank you for coming in. I know you're going to enjoy the snow outside and your new winter boots that you found, and I'm thrilled with my couch that we ended up changing the whole room for a different product. But overall, again, thank you for your time today. Any final parting thoughts that you wanted to share with our listeners that we haven't covered yet?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, this has been great. I always love coming to see the team. If you're in Chicago, please stay warm and bundled up, and honestly, go somewhere else. But
yes, go somewhere else. You were talking about like Florida trips and other areas.
No,
before,
it's perfect.
So.
I've never been to Chicago in the winter, so this is my inaugural Chicago winter trip.
I hear it's a one-hit wonder, so
we'll see about that.
Depends on if you live here or
I'll
not.
be back in August again.
But you're from New York, so you're also
heading right back to more
clients
snow.
We've had from some warmer states who have had to buy the winter coat the minute they stepped off the plane are the fun stories I like to always refer to anyone who hasn't been to Chicago in the winter.
Oh dear. No, I just had to take the tags off my boots, that's all.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for tuning into the future by listening to the Lessons for Tomorrow podcast. For more information about the topics discussed today, check out the description of this episode. If you want us to cover a topic or submit feedback, please email us at lessonsfortomorrow@americaneagle.com and let us know. Be sure to follow this podcast wherever you listen to them to stay up to date with us. And while you're at it, if you wouldn't mind giving us a rating and sharing this podcast with others to prepare them for the future. And also, most importantly, even though I don't exist there that often, please follow us on social media. This episode is brought to you by AmericanEagle.com Studios. I'll catch you in the next lesson.